Welcome to the Happy Rebel podcast, where we explore the realms of finding your calling, living your values, and doing the work of self-healing. Through candid conversations with fellow seekers, we'll uncover ideas and concepts that challenge, expand, and empower us to embrace our authentic selves and live with intention. Hi there, I'm Kelly Street, owner of Happy Rebel and your guide on this journey. I'm known for my insatiable curiosity and tendency for pushing boundaries. I've always been a challenger, eager to question the status quo and explore the uncharted territories of personal growth. So join me as we navigate the twists and turns of life's journey, seeking out the wisdom and insights that illuminate our path towards fulfillment and rebellion against the ordinary. Before we get started, I want to remind you to connect with me on Instagram at Happy Rebel, where you can ask questions and share your thoughts. Remember, you are never alone on your path to becoming a happy rebel. This is the Happy Rebel Podcast. As we enter the space of the Happy Rebel podcast, I invite you to gently focus your eyes, or if possible, allow your eyes to be fully closed. Take a deep, cleansing breath and exhale to ground into your body. Inhale deeply, visualizing a golden light in your heart center. With each exhale, imagine that light is growing stronger and brighter. Continue breathing in and out as you prepare yourself to honor the complexities of life, embracing the balance between the light and the dark of your own experiences and the conversation to come. With gratitude for this moment of grounding and connection, slowly open your eyes or return to the room as we begin this podcast adventure together. Welcome, Sara. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yay! Why don't you introduce yourself to everyone?
Sure. My name is Sara Stibitz, and I'm a professional writer, creative coach, and a shamanic guide, and I help people bring out the best story in them.
Yeah, you do. I love it. Okay, I can't wait to get into like what you do in the world, because I think that's such like a great little elevator speech for what you do, but there is knowing you. There is so much magic involved in what you do and who you are, which I think hence is like the shamanism and the kind of writing worlds coming together.
Yeah, it's been a really interesting journey. I have been a professional writer for it'll be 12 years this year. And I certainly didn't start out trying to blend anything having to do with energy work or animism or anything related to shamanism. At the time, I was really more like just trying to find my footing as a writer, and started out, small blogs and articles here and there. And then it was a friend who pushed me into helping people write books. He was writing a book of his own that he wanted to publish on Amazon. And he said to me, "You're going to edit my book." And I said, "I don't know how to edit books." And he's like, "Yeah, you do." And we did it in a very intensive session in like 1 or 2 weeks, I think, working, much of the day, every day. And I realized I do know something about this. And so that, set me on the path of working with people to write books. And over time, my business became more about ghostwriting and book doctoring and editing than it was about article writing. And that was a pretty natural fit for me. But also over that time, like I've always had an interest in shamanism and energy work and the spiritual side of things. I just didn't really know how to bring that into my life in a more grounded or in a way that like brought it to the forefront, rather than sort of always in the background. And I went through a bunch of, I'm 42, and as people reaching their midlife, the midlife point realize like things start to change. So there was a point, the pandemic happened, my father passed away, all sorts of things changed. And I realized like as much as I love writing, it just wasn't enough. There was still something more. And so I had to sort of step back for a little bit to develop the spiritual side of my work and to kind of go deep. And so, for the last 2 years, it's been interesting to try to bring those worlds together in new ways. And I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Oh, that's really cool. And because I know you personally. And I mean, I kind of know almost everybody that I interview on here, but like I know you a little bit more than some other people I've talked to. I know that, to bring it back to the writing thing, that you are writing your own book right now, or that I guess really like it's already been written.
Yeah. It's actually been written. I don't know. I think we've talked about this. I don't remember if I've told you the full story, but I wrote the first, actually, maybe I got through the second draft all the way back in like 2018.
Yeah.
And I didn't feel ready to publish it at all. Not to mention, my family and I decided to leave Colorado and go travel for a while abroad. So we packed up and spent 3 months in Bali 2 months in Bali and 3 months in New Zealand. So it just, our focus shifted to very outward and like being out in the world rather than business growth. But I didn't feel ready. I mean, the truth was, I just did not feel confident in what I had to say about writing. And in a way, I'm kind of glad I waited, because I gained so many more experiences over the following few years that really rounded out the ideas and sharpened them to the point where I'm pretty proud of what it is. I have no illusions of thinking this is it. And I'm sure in 5 years, I'll be like, oh, I need to revise it. My views will have changed again.
Yeah.
But I feel like the basis, the foundation that I'm starting from isn't going to change. So I feel pretty ready to put it out. And it's a book that's going to help people focus on writing nonfiction. So probably like if you're writing personal development, how to, or something related to your business, this is going to be a helpful book, or memoir. So people who are writing in those genres will find an essential guide to putting it all together and coming up with your rough draft in this book.
Very cool. Isn't it crazy how we think we have a timing for something for ourselves or in our lives, and then that's like, oh no, that's not the timing that's going to happen. That's going to happen when you're actually really ready for it to happen.
Yes, totally. And I've had a lot of people say like, why don't you put this book out? Isn't it ready? It's like, well, you're a writer writing about writing. I want to feel clear, like what I'm saying. And I also think in that genre, you think about the big books like Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott and Writing Down the Bones, like these big classics. These writers were writing usually at the end of their careers where they have quite a lot to say about writing. And I was like, I don't want to feel like I'm jumping the gun, but it also gave me the time to really develop the ideas that I set down in the first place. The book didn't change drastically. The basic ideas stayed the same, but the development and the understanding of the nuance and the depth of the, being able to describe what a typical writer like the problems a typical writer runs into when they're trying to write their book for the first time or even the second or third time, is really going to change the experience of the book. If I can actually nail your emotional experience, that's going to be a lot more helpful.
Oh, for sure. How much of your personal story is a part of this book?
Yeah, I include some of my personal stories. So one of the things that makes this book a little bit different is my personal belief is that, people talk about writing being hard and writing a book being exceptionally hard. But I actually think it's what trips people up is the emotional experience of it. And no one really goes into it understanding the length of time that it's going to take them, nor do they understand the emotional roller coaster that they will go on when they write it. So what I think is different about this book is it's not just the tactics of how to organize everything that you want to say, how to think about your premise and your promise and all those things. It's also like, here's where you might get stuck because you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed. Here's where you might get stuck because you're not sure what to do next. So it's a little bit more of a emotional guide in addition to very tactical, like here's what to do next. Yeah, so I think when it comes to my story, I've included pieces of what I've experienced as a writer, but I also share a lot of my clients' experiences and what I've witnessed in other writers that I've coached through the process. So there's a lot of like examples and case studies and things like that.
Yeah. I think the length of time that it takes to actually write a book, or that it takes to get a book from concept to actual creation, or like to a physical thing that you can hold and touch and give to people. That has been one of the things that has stunned me in my process
Yeah.
of like, because I'll be honest, like my experience of writing the first draft of my book was kind of crazy and different for people. Like I wrote it in 3 weeks and it just
Fabulous.
sort of poured out of me, but then it's been 3 years.
Right.
And that has been the most painful part of the process.
Yeah. Well, I think there's so many angles to that. Number one, like when we see this book, like we had all these books. I have, for people who are listening, I have a ton of books behind me on my bookshelves.
Yeah.
And we look at a book and we're like, hey, look at this beautiful product. We have no connection to how long each one of those books took, right? Like it just appears in our hand, or online, and it's available to us. Like we just don't know, did that take 10 years? Did it take 3 years? Did it take 1 year to write? Did it take 1 year to write but 15 years to develop and research? Like we're not connected to the actual process that the writer goes through at all as the reader or consumer of the book. So we don't have any understanding of what we're really like, the product that we're holding. Number one. So when we go to do it, it's like we're just completely disconnected from that. And then number two, I was thinking about this the other day, like it is really strange. It's an ephemeral idea for a really long time, right? It's something that's just out there. You're not able to really touch it. The most you've got, the most tactile thing you've got is you're touching your keyboard, right? Otherwise it's like digits on a screen. It's just letters and symbols on a screen. And it's really not until like the last 10% that you actually get to hold this physical, real thing that is the result of all that. And it's kind of weirdly disorienting. Like in contrast, if you do a painting, like the painting is here, right? It's already here. It could be a really bad painting, but it's still something you can touch. Or, if you're making something with your hands, like it's already here, but books spend so much time in sort of this like ephemeral realm first before they actually come in as a physical product.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Okay. So as you are editing this book that is now turning like 7 years old.
Yeah. I hadn't done the math,
Isn't
but
that
yes.
funny? Sorry. I'm so sorry, Sarah. But it's great.
No,
It's great.
it's good.
You have this, little 7-year-old that's about to be born into the world. And so as you're editing your stories that maybe you started with 7 years ago, how much, as you've evolved, like how much do you change the stories or adapt them to fit who you are now versus who you were when you wrote the first draft?
Yeah. It's interesting. I don't know that I've had to change the story. I've added more stories, right? Obviously, I've accumulated more stories in the last 7 years. So I have added more stories. But the original stories, it's more like I have a better depth of understanding for them, where they might have been more of a surface level skim. Now I can go a couple levels deeper and say, here's what was really going on in the background, because I have a better understanding, both from history and from having seen far more examples. So yeah, I feel like, if you've ever gone back and read your old writing, sometimes you're like, wow, this is great. And other times you're like, oh my gosh, I really missed the mark here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who was I when I wrote
Who was
this?
I?
What was
What kind of
happening?
mood? Right. Like,
Yes.
what mood was I in when I wrote this? I can kind of have a flavor of it. I think, it's great to be able to see that and then say, okay, and this is just not how I'm going to say it now. This is not the place I want to come back from. So being able to keep a lot of the stories, because they all have value, but taking them deeper has really changed the tone of the book.
What do you think are not to give too much away for this book that will be in the world, but what do you think your kind of like top 1 or 2 either tips or mindset shifts that people need to have if they're thinking about writing their own book? Because I hear from, like in my therapy practice, like I hear from multiple clients that they want to write a book. And maybe that's unusual maybe that's common. I'm not sure. But a lot of people will say over their lifetime, like, I really want to write a book. But like 1% of those people actually do it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's a couple things. It might be three things, right? Number one, when people say they want to write a book, like we said earlier, they're not usually connected to what it takes to write a book.
Yeah.
So I think there's a couple layers to that. It's like, first, get acquainted with that. The average time there's no average time that it takes to write a book. But what I notice is people come into this experience and like, I'm going to write a book and I'd love for it to be out in 6 months, or they'll tell me even a shorter timeline. It's sort of funny, but it's just, they just don't know. And then there's also all kinds of ads out there right now that will promote things like write a book in a weekend. I just got one like
Yes.
Write a book in a week. And like, this is just unrealistic. I don't know anyone who's participated in that and been successful or happy with what they produced. So it's just first, like, really get familiar with what kind of time it's going to take to write a book. I tell most people, like, look, probably an hour, probably a year. It's going to take you a year to get to a place where you are happy with your draft. And it could be that you have a year and then you start the editing process. Maybe you have a year and you're like, I got to set this aside for a while and just let it sit while I think about it. Maybe you get a publisher and that applies some pressure to get the work done. That also changes the timeline. But the big thing is people come into this with really unrealistic expectations. And then they sort of get a flavor of like, oh, it's not going to be, a week. It's not even going to be 3 months for most people, right? It's not even going to be 6 months for most people. And so getting familiar with what it really takes and the commitment it takes to do this is a huge deal there. Another thing is like, what is your definition of done? So in project management, what people agree on, right, is what is the definition of done for whatever it is that's being built within this project. And most people don't realize, they don't think really deeply like, what is my definition of done for this book? But what they end up doing is saying things like, well, for it to be a real book, it has to look like this. And look like this, I'm using air quotes right now and you can't see me, but look like this is, it's 60,000 to 75,000 words, just like all the other books on my shelf. And there actually, people aren't even thinking in words. They're thinking of, it has to be thick. There's a thickness that it has to have. Right. Okay.
Yes.
So that's, they're not even articulating it, but that's one definition of done. And or they'll say things like, it has to be traditionally published, right? Those are whole hurdles that one has to go through to get a book published.
Yes.
That in just even the traditional publishing door, like, introduces so much more time and complexity to the process. As
I can attest, 100%.
As you know, right? Like when you choose that path over, say, like self-publishing or even hybrid publishing, it elongates the process by a year to 2 years usually. So getting clear, like, what do you mean by I want to write a book is really important. You can have a message that you convey in 30,000 to 40,000 words. That is not the typical standard size of a book, and it can still be an excellent book. And you can put it out on Amazon, or you can put it out solely as an audiobook. More and more people are doing that. So getting really clear, like, is my definition of done fair? Is it realistic for what I've got? When I say fair, I mean like fair to me as a creator. Is it actually what I want, or am I holding myself to a standard that someone else set, right? And really getting like, what do I need? If you're writing it for your business, what does your business actually need? Does it actually need to be a 60 to 75,000 word book that's published by the biggest publisher? I don't know. That really depends on your clients and your business needs, but most people don't need that. They need something out there, and they need the flexibility to use it in the way that they want. And that route doesn't always get them there. So the definition of, like, not allowing someone else's definition of done to hijack yours is really important. So there's like some time spending there to get clear, like, what do I mean by write a book? Because that can mean a lot of things.
Yes. Okay. I have 2 follow-up questions for you.
Yeah.
Should I give them to you one at a time, or?
Yes.
Okay. First question is, and there might be pretty simple. First question is, how many words is the average nonfiction book? Because, 60 to 75,000 words, is that the norm that
Yeah.
people need to go for? Okay.
Well, so it's like the old standard. So most tradition, remember, self-publishing and hybrid publishing, they're not new. They've been around for 20 to 30 years, but it was called vanity publishing for a really long time. And the reason it was called,
Oh.
did you know? Yeah,
I did not know that.
it's so funny because it's very insulting, right? So
Yes.
if you couldn't get a book deal and you decided I'm going to go print it myself, I'm going to go publish it myself, they just called it a vanity book. Like, this is all about your ego, right? And that name, people still call, I still hear some of like the old guards in the publishing industry will still say
Yeah.
vanity publishing. So it's not even over yet, right? Like,
Mhm.
so only in the last like 20 years has self-publishing gained a lot more credibility and become more of a robust option as well because of Amazon largely. But Amazon's not the only player in there. Remind me the question. Oh, yes. Okay. 60,000.
How many words are in the
Right.
average
So
nonfiction book?
I'm here with you. So
Yes.
the old guard, traditional publishing was like your book needs to be somewhere between 60 to 75,000 for it to be a real book that has substance, right? People do go to bookstores and say, I'm going to pay $30 for a really thin book. People think about things like that.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
and so this kind of standard became sort of the standard, whether the idea needed it or not. Because the idea doesn't always need that many words, but it just became the standard. And you also have to think about they're printing in mass. So they're paying for, um, you know, when they send a book to a printer, it's like, all right, they set up this whole file, a printer that has to switch between 30,000 word books, 45,000 word books, 80,000 word books, 60, that's more time and more money. So if they can standardize this product into this sort of like, this is how thick it is, this is how many pages they need, it's much easier for those mechanics, right? But now that we have self-publishing and we have print on demand publishing, things just aren't the same. And so I think we're going to see that standard start to slowly shift away for traditional publishers eventually. Because the other piece of it is it's not only that printing is changing, it's also that people's attention spans are changing. Like, we have people who like they don't read books as much anymore, or they like bite-sized information because of the way we're all being trained by social media and the way information is dispensed to us. So my personal thought when authors ask like how long should it be, it really is like it should really be as long as it takes for you to convey the idea really well. And if that takes 20,000 words, great. You just saved yourself and your reader so much time. I don't know about you, but I have read plenty of books where I've picked it up and I've gotten so much out of the first like 3 or 4 chapters. And then the rest, I'm like, they just tacked it on. They were clearly trying to meet a word limit or word expectation. And the rest of this didn't need to be here.
Yes. A lot of business books are like that, where they have like one amazing idea that would take 20,000 words to explain, essentially like 5 long blog posts, and then they feel the need to add on another 30 or 40,000 words to make the book seem worth it.
Exactly.
And it's just all filler content. Are we really doing this?
Yes.
I guess I'll finish it.
Yeah. And it's just not true that it needs to be longer to be meaty. I just keep thinking of like Seth Godin, who, he's published prolifically, but like one of his most impactful books for me was The Dip. And that's a really small book. And he really just conveys the idea of the dip and then he's done. That's all he needs to do. And I think there's another one like
Sam Harris is also like that.
Yes.
Who does really very well conceived ideas or explores a particular thought, but doesn't make it longer than it needs to be.
Yeah. And how did you decide how long your book needed to be? Like, did it feel were you like, this is complete? Or, how did it feel to you to come to a length with your book?
That is a good question, especially because, okay, where I'm at now is I have the finished manuscript. I just handed it in to the publisher. And right now, the manuscript is 105,000 words, around there, which is longer than it needs to be, longer than I was even supposed to submit. I was supposed to submit around 90,000 words, but I okayed it with him. And part of the reason that it is longer at this point is that I wanted to give my editors and the publisher a chance to say, this is the direction that this chapter, this section should go. So let's cut out 50% of these, go from 10,000 words to 5,000 words in this section. And I am a first-time author. I'm not a professional editor. I haven't been doing this for 12 years like you have. And so I think for me, I'm just sort of, I didn't necessarily like throw it all at the wall and see what sticks. But there are portions of the book where I'm like, can somebody who knows what they're doing help me cut this down? Yeah. Because I'm not sure what needs to matter here. So I anticipate that the final book will be somewhere between 75,000 and 90,000 words, which means that a full third of what I have written is going to end up on the cutting room floor.
Yeah. And what's interesting about that is then you look at that and you wonder, like, is that the seed for your next book?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'll stop you there.
Yes.
But for other people, yes, what gets cut out or left behind absolutely should become the seed for whatever is next.
Right. And, even if you look at it and you're like, actually, this isn't the seed, it's too much overlapping, or like it would be reiterating, you could say, like, this is bonus material that didn't make it in the book, or bonus stories or bonus ideas, things that can easily become your, like, not your lead magnet, but when you say, hey, in the book, you're going to have your URL, right? Please go to this URL for, things that had to be cut because there was no room, extra stories, ideas, templates, all the things, right? So it's never really lost.
My second question that I had for you about everything that you just said about the background of writing is, what do you think of hybrid publishing?
I think it's an excellent option, but you have to be a wise consumer.
Okay. And then can you just give like a 1 minute, because I just realized like a lot of people listening might not have any idea what hybrid publishing is.
Right. Yep. So, okay, we talked about the word vanity publishing. Hybrid publishing is like the rebrand, because no one calls it vanity publishing anymore. But it's also, I think they've changed styles as well. So like the modern day hybrid publishing is, you get the benefits of a publisher, right? You as the author approach this publisher, and if the arrangement works and they like your work, they'll provide the editing for you, some level of editing. It's different depending on the house. But let's just say at least basic levels of editing, sometimes more complex levels of editing. They'll do the distribution and the printing, all the fussy details in the back, like the Amazon listing and the Barnes & Noble listing and the Library of Congress registration, all this stuff that is a little annoying to deal with, right? They'll do the design, all this stuff. But instead of you coming to the publisher and them like either paying you or giving you royalties, you're paying the publisher for this deal. And the current prices are typically anywhere between, like, I've seen 5,000 at the lowest, but I think at more average is 8 to 20,000. And one of the biggest determinants of that number is how many printed copies you're getting in that deal. And it also depends on the distribution networks of that publisher. Those are sort of being commodified, like distribution's getting easier. So they're not as much differentiated from one hybrid publisher to the next anymore. They're more often than not using many of the same channels anyway. So when you're thinking about a hybrid publisher, it's a great option for people who want they want the help, they want the support, they don't want to have to go it completely on their own and pull all these pieces together. They want someone to do distribution for them. That's a big plus. And they want to retain creative control because these publishers aren't buying the copyright of your book, right? You're not selling your copyright. And that's a red flag. If they're trying to get you to do that, that you should not go with that publisher, right? So it's a really great option for people who need that flexibility and want the support. And I notice more people who have businesses who can write this off as a business expense and have their business pay for a hybrid publisher is often like a really, easier way to go than someone who's publishing a fiction book and goes with a hybrid publisher, because books are a hard sell, and you want to make sure you're going to be getting some kind of return on that investment. And it's not usually through book sales. It's usually through referrals or leads or speaking gigs or consulting gigs, clients, customers, things like that. And so when people who decide to work with a hybrid publisher, they're usually thinking, I know I'll recover this expense because this book will lead to X amount of speaking gigs in the next 2 years. So where you have to be wary, though, is like really looking at the agreement. What are you agreeing to? What are the royalties fees? How deep is the editing? That's a big thing. People are like, well, I have an editor. It's like, well, some of these shops aren't going to tell you, hey, your work really needs refinement. They're going to give it a copy edit. And a copy edit means they're just looking at the words, the organization of your sentences and your punctuation, and that's it. They're not helping you clarify your ideas. They're not helping you improve your book structure. So you have to ask about how the arrangement is with the royalties and the fees. You need to be really clear what kind of editing and what level, what depth that you're going to get. And you also need to be really clear what they're going to do for the marketing. That's one of the other big pieces. People assume they're going to market. Some of these shops do help market, some don't. And that needs to be another piece that's very clear.
Cool. Thank you for that little overview into there. And I considered hybrid publishing, but in the end, it wasn't what happened, and it just wasn't for me. And that's okay. But I know lots of people who use hybrid publishers and have really good experiences, and some who have bad experiences, but it's kind of everything in between. Just like any way that you put your book out there are pros and cons to each one of them.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't know anyone who's just had a lovely, easy experience, no matter which route they took. Like everyone has, you're going to face problems. This is why people give up on book writing and publishing. Like you're going to run into problems. It's just, which problems would you rather deal with and which problems would you rather avoid?
Yeah. Stay tuned for what my problems will be.
I can't wait.
Anyway,
I think you're going to have a really good experience, but I am very excited to hear how your edits roll out once you get your feedback back.
Yeah, so far so good. We'll see. Okay, I want to shift directions a little bit because there is something that feels really important to me to talk about, knowing you and your background, and in particular, it's with your work as a ghostwriter. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I have been really fascinated about with you in that work, first of all, I find ghostwriting to be kind of an endlessly fascinating, there's so much about it. But the one thing with you that I would love to go into is how you connect with the voices or the message of the people that you work with. Because I think it's such a particular skill set to be able to embody someone else's work.
Yeah. I think, ghostwriting is a really weird world. If I could tell all the stories I've experienced as a ghostwriter, people, I don't think, would believe some of them. And I joke about writing an anonymous memoir called Giving Up the Ghost.
Yes, I want that book to come into the world. The world needs it because I think it is so strange and fascinating. And there are a lot of people out in the world like don't understand that most of the celebrity memoirs out there are ghostwritten. They are not written by that celebrity or person.
Yeah. So I will say this. There's all kinds of ways to ghostwrite. Like the people, the Hillary Clintons of the world, right? They're not sitting down and giving their ghostwriter hour upon hour of time. That ghostwriter probably gets a couple of hours, and then they probably have to interview people around that person to pull this together, and then their team reviews it. So there's different levels, right? Most people I know, that's a different stratosphere. Most people I know, most ghostwriters are sitting for, prolonged time with their client to both hear their stories, to understand their ideas, to piece through what they want to say, things like that. So when it comes to hearing the voice, I think this is sort of where energetic work has been sort of leaking into my work for a long time without me really being aware of it, or at least, being able to name it. As a young ghostwriter, I believe that I started to sort of tap into or tune into my clients in a way that was far more energetic than mental. And I would try to, for lack of a better word, like channel their voice, channel how I would hear them and get to what they wanted to say. And now as a practitioner, I'm very aware, like there was a little bit of a violation of energy. Wasn't intentional, but like I don't poke around on people's energy that way at this point. But it was also sort of unconscious. It was like, well, I'm not quite sure how to get their voice, so I'm going to try this without really naming it for myself. And it worked really well. It did work really well, except that if you're channeling someone and you're not really attuned to what you're doing, like you're going to bring in more than just their voice. So I started to feel the chaos of my clients' lives or feel their emotions beyond what I needed to feel. It was like empathy times 10. It was too much. And it really came to a head with one client where I finally recognized, like I finally looked at it and said, this is actually what I'm doing. I'm not sort of imagining it. And this particular client was in real turmoil for a lot of things going on in his life. And it was really affecting me. So I could no longer ignore it and pretend this wasn't happening. It was just like, I'm feeling these things. And now I have to completely stop doing this. I'm not even sure how I'm doing it, but I have to stop it. And so it resulted in this really strange period of time where I did manage to cut it off. And then strangely, and I never said this to my clients. It's not like I was saying, hey, this is what I'm doing. But this client was sensitive enough where 2 weeks after I cut it off, he commented on it and said, I can't feel you anymore. I don't think you get my voice anymore. It was startling. And it was confirmation of like, oh, okay. Yeah, I've totally got to reconfigure how I do this. And it took a long time. I would say now it's really like, let me just listen to the cadence of the way that you use words and practice writing them. Let me just absorb the message, like you give me your message, and let me just sit with the energy of that without actually having to connect to you, right? And that can do a lot. And I think the other piece of this that I had to come to grips with is not every client was an energetic match. It just doesn't work if our personalities don't jive, if we, aren't genuinely into hanging out with each other. I mean, this is a long time to spend with someone that you're like, I don't know, right? So I started to realize I don't really need to tap into anyone that way when we're already sort of simpatico, and I can be on board with your message because your message is inherently good. And there's other ways to do this. So it really was a strange evolution to realize like I am doing this. And not only was I doing it, but this person now feels that it's gone. And now I have to relearn how to get someone's voice and make them feel heard, which I'll admit was messy. I don't think it went that well for about a year. I think it took a year for me to sort of reorient and pick up on how to do this in a different way.
And how long has that been since you've had to kind of relearn this process and tap in or connect in a different way?
Yeah, I'd say it's been 4 years, somewhere between 4 and 5 years, something like that.
Have you ever had someone tell you that they love a book you've helped write or you wrote without them knowing that you wrote it?
I've had people mention books and like how it's helped them, what they thought about it. Yeah, I wouldn't say I've had someone say my books I've helped, like wonderful books, but they're not like the kind of book where people like love it. They're a lot of utilitarian books, right? It's like how to fix this problem in your business, how to coach yourself through lack of focus, things like that. So I've definitely had people mention like this book was pivotal in changing how I thought about things, or this book changed my business. I guess I reserve the word love for like the books where you're like, can't put it down because it's so good.
Yes.
Which for me is usually fiction, but
yeah,
semantics.
Yeah. Okay. My last question for you as a fellow book lover, do you have a couple of top books that you recommend or a couple of books that you just absolutely love, whatever genre?
Yeah. I have been thinking about like putting a list together for my daughter of like books that must be read sometime in your life. So I think Care of the Soul by Thomas More is probably my top book. Yeah.
Okay.
That one really came along at a pivotal time for me. And I felt like I read it in Kindle and I swear I was just like highlighting every line. Like everything was good. And it was one of those books where, like I will read this many times because it was just that important to me. One of my favorite fiction books is called The Anomaly by Hervé. I'm going to butcher his name. It's French. Hervé Letellier. And it's The Anomaly, and the last name is Telleier. You have to like kind of dig for it on Amazon if you want to find it. But it was the kind of writing that made me mad at the end. Like it was so good. It was so good that it was like, oh God, I have just seen like what's capable or what's possible in storytelling, and I may never arrive at that level of skill. That's how good it was. Yeah. And that will probably be one of my top fiction books for a very long time. All-time favorite, I still love East of Eden by John Steinbeck. It was one of my first big literary reads when I was in college. And I remember thinking he taught while telling a story, but not in one of those like cheesy allegory ways. It's truly epic writing. And then a recent read that I really loved was We Will Be Jaguars. And I think it came out last year, and it's a memoir, and it's by Nemante Nenkimo. And it's really, really good. It's this woman who belongs to a tribe in Amazon, and basically details from her childhood all the way through her young adulthood what it was like to watch her land be colonized. And then what was fascinating is like you read the story and it's kind of angry, and like you see the stuff and it's very angering, but at the same time there's this weird way where you understand the inevitability of some of it too. Like it's terrible and inevitable all at the same time, even in her own life, because the culture, obviously the Western culture that was invading, eventually gave her more freedom than she ever would have had staying in her own culture. It was just this very interesting way to understand like how these things tangle together in strange ways. But it's ultimately a really uplifting book because she and her husband and their members of the tribe unite these different groups of people from all over the Amazon to fight the oil companies in Ecuador, and they win. And how often does that happen? And
Not
so
often.
Right. So it's a very uplifting book, and it gives you a real glimpse of how things have evolved to where they are now. And and it's really just, I left with a taste of like, this is a brave person, and people actually can make change.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, where do you want people to find you, Sara?
You can find me at sarastibitz.com. Last name is Stibitz. And I would love if you'd stop by.
Amazing. Perfect. And also, they should check out your Substack.
Oh, you're right. Yeah. So I have a Substack. I share my writing as well as tips on creativity and writing. The Substack is A Ladder to the Stars, and you can find that at aladdertothestars.substack.com. But you can also go to my website and you can find a link there as well.
Perfect. Fabulous. Thank you for your time today.
Yeah. Well, thank you for a lovely interview.
Thank you for being part of the Happy Rebel podcast community. Stay connected with us on Instagram at Happy Rebel. If you've enjoyed our episodes, please consider rating, liking, and reviewing the podcast. It truly does help us grow. Until next time, this is Kelly Street. Remember, embrace the dark and the light.